This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know. And we are back with another fabulous episode of Jews You Should Know, our last pre-Passover release, and we'll probably have a little bit of a break on perhaps right after the holiday itself. And oh, what a time we continue to be in here in Corona land, the time of COVID-19 here in early April 2020 for those listening on or near our release date. Today's episode actually dovetails very much with the theme of the times and also with the two previous interviews that we released. The last 2 weeks have been about various ethnicities, different kinds of Jews from around the world. Yehuda Kahalani from Tanzania and Sharon Shalom from Ethiopia. So both African Jews currently in Israel, two amazing people. Today we switch to a different part of the world and introduce Yosef Mendelevich. Yosef is one of the great prisoners of Zion of the 1970s and has been one of the major players in the worldwide Russian Jewry movement, both in terms of helping them gain their freedom and then helping them integrate and become educated as Jews in the decades since. And of course, the theme connecting to Passover and to the coronavirus is hard to ignore, and I'm not going to pretend it was unintentional, my timing of release. We find ourselves in some sort of a prison. Thankfully not, for most people, the type of prison that the Gulag was in Soviet Russia, but a prison nonetheless. And it's something that we all yearn to be released from, to reconnect with our friends and family in person all over. And obviously we're about to celebrate Passover. For those listening a little bit afterwards, may have already celebrated. But of course, Passover, Pesach is all about that liberation from slavery to freedom. Not only the historical exodus, but the renewed sense of freedom that we can find each and every year from our own demons, from our own struggles and travails, from that which holds us back from reaching our potential, both individually and nationally as a Jewish people. Yosef Mendelevich, again a prisoner of Zion, truly represents this unbreakable spirit, which is the title of his book, in fact. The unbreakable spirit, the eternality of the Jewish soul. And much like he was able to transcend his circumstances, we too in quarantine can and will do the same, and we will celebrate a Pesach like never before. Physically, of course, but hopefully spiritually as well, in terms of the immediacy and the power of our celebration. A reminder, as always, to follow us on social media at Jews You Should Know, spelled out fully, on Instagram and Facebook. Jews You Should Know with the letter U on Twitter. Remember to subscribe wherever you may be listening, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, Overcast, any podcast application. Please spread the word, let your friends know how to subscribe as well. Comments and suggestions, Jews You Should Know at gmail.com. And now to our conversation with longtime prisoner of Zion, author, educator, incredible human being, Yosef Mendelevich. We are here with famous refusenik and great advocate for Russian Jewry, Yosef Mendelevich. How are you, Yosef?
I am fine, Baruch Hashem.
Wonderful to hear, and thank you so much for joining us. I had the pleasure of hearing you speak a number of years ago, not so long ago actually, in Silver Spring, Maryland, where I live. I was able to purchase your book at that time and hear the story. But for our audience today, tell us a little bit about where, in particular, in the former Soviet Union, you were raised, and a little bit about your upbringing.
To begin with, I am not a refusnik. I am a prisoner of Zion. It makes a difference. Refusnik, people that got refused under their request to leave Soviet Russia, prisoner of Zion were arrested for that. So it makes a difference. And then I'm from Latvia. Latvia is nowadays an independent Baltic state, as it used to be before the Second World War. And then it was divided, as you know, there was a treaty between Hitler and Stalin to divide Europe. And on the treaty, Latvia became a part of the Soviet Union. So being a Latvian Jew, I'm altogether a Russian Jew, for I speak both languages, Latvian and Russian, and some English and some Hebrew. Anyway, it's my background. I was born after the war, the Holocaust, in Soviet Union. And I got a regular upbringing, education, like a regular Soviet student. We were called the small soldiers of Stalin. I was later, I started studying in a high school a bit later after he passed away on Purim, but it's the kind of education. You sit this way like a soldier and you obey. What kind of education? They educate you to obey and not to ask the questions.
And did you actually buy into what you were being taught there, or was it more of just conforming to the society you were a part of?
You know, the whole structure, the whole system of education was built in the way to make you a model Soviet citizen, to modify, not to ask question, you know, and you follow. You're like, you are not yourself. You are part of a mainstream of thousands and thousands of students, and you are like a part of it. So it takes an effort to start thinking independently, which happened with me. But the majority, as you know, followed, you know, for, as to say, the majority of human beings are not thinking too much, you know, just going the general way. So it's a miracle that I don't know how. I believe because of my DNA, not specifically Jewish, for there were other Jews that cooperated with the Soviets and at least obeyed. For some reason, my DNA told me not to obey. That's my background. Getting a regular Russian education without almost no Jewish background, and all of a sudden it's me, Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich. It's a miracle.
So, how old were you when you started to question?
I wouldn't say that I would set a question, why and how. It was like a development, step-by-step development, and I assume it was around my age of 15 or 16, like a teenager, a regular teenager. And then there were some other reasons that made me to think again. For previously, when I was a child of 10, my father was arrested by the Soviets on an economical basis. It was a trumped up accusation, nothing true. But the moment, you know, you understood that the authorities don't like you too much, you know, you yourself don't like them as well, you know. So it's good for a beginning just to know that they would declare, the Soviets, that they love people, you know, and doing everything for people like prosperity. But you study yourself that it's not true at all, you know. Just stop trusting the authorities and whatever they say.
How long was your father in prison?
Oh, for a very short time, in a year and a half. But it broke the family. For my mother was like a communist believer, and she couldn't understand how this regime can arrest an innocent man, you know. So he got ill from that, and passed away when I was a child. So it was, a good beginning, so-called good beginning, to start thinking differently from others. For you understand that you are not be treating as a good Soviet citizen. Somehow you are wrong. You are not a good Soviet citizen.
What did it do to your mother's connection to communism when your father was in prison? Did it change her beliefs?
I believe so. As a matter of fact, my mother and my father, being brought up in Latvia, got a religious background that time in the 30s. But they looked to solve everybody's problem. Like your candidate from Democrats, Bernie Sanders, Barry Sanders, that solves that socialism will solve everything. So they trusted that it's good, it's for the rabbis, now teaching and teaching and teaching, nothing really comes out good from their teachings. And now there is a whole state, Soviet Union, that make the change, the big change that will finally be good for everybody, for humanity. So they joined it, for whatever the Soviets would declare was in Torah, behavte lerecha kamocha, etc. It was their declarations. As a matter of fact, it was not true. As almost every authority, declares something one and is doing altogether differently. So anyway, before the war, they trusted the Soviets that it's good that the Soviet Union is building a paradise, and they hoped to get there, to be part of something new, not the regular way of life. Specifically after the First War, it was bad, and then finally, when in 1940 they became a part of Soviet Union, then they discovered the truth. But still, it's hard for people to admit that they were wrong, So it took a while. They were somehow disillusioned, but not, I would believe, not telling to themselves, wow, we made a major mistake. It takes a courage for a person to admit that he is wrong. So it was a final understanding in 1957 when my father was arrested. But then, you have another problem. You lost your belief in whatever you believed before. What will come as an exchange for that, You can say, everybody is lying, You cannot trust to anybody. The life is bad, It's not for us. And you pass away. It happened with my mother. If somebody could tell her, come back, become a religious Jew, it's a solution. But nobody could tell her that time, for the society was not religious. It was anti-religious in the Soviet Union. All the rabbis were massacred during the Holocaust. In Latvia, heavily population mostly was killed under the Holocaust. No rabbis left. And then there was no the Soviet approach to give the rabbi a position, to deal with people. So all of a sudden, you, like my mother, you found yourself in a vacuum. Nobody can help you. Imagine her with 3 small children, the father arrested. There is no incomes. Some Jews would come and give some small money. But you can do it, it was really a disaster.
So what did you start doing at 15, 16?
I simply went to work in a factory to support my father. After he was released, his house was ruined. He got a stroke. He couldn't work. So I worked at the factory. And what's important, when I'm mentioning it again, we would go in the evening to study in high school for working youth. And then when I arrived to this specific high school in Latvia, Riga, the capital of Latvia is Riga, it turned out that in this specific high school, there are a lot of Jews. You imagine Riga had that time almost 1 million of residents, and there were some 30,000 Jews, but it was not a community. They had no synagogues. We were dispersed, never meet each other. And then all of a sudden, I met in the high school a lot of Jewish boys, and how it started. As we say, in Rosh Hashanah, Zdanot na'asot zchuyot. Something bad can be changed and became good. So it's not my evil that my father was arrested. But it turned out that finally it served me, to push me to a certain direction, meeting Jews. And when you meet Jewish boys, some of them, I believe, were already under Zionist or nationalist influence, and they influenced us. So it's how it started.
Where were people getting their nationalist information from? Like the people that you met, where was that coming from?
There are two sources for that. To begin with, again, Latvia was a democratic state before the war. So some of the parents of these specific guys that I met were good educated, as good Jews, and never stopped it. Unlike my parents, they never trusted communism and continue to be good Jews. So it's one source. And the second source was that after Stalin died in 1953, and there was a change in rulership. New people come, and they released prisoners. Stalin had in Gulag some maybe 3 million of prisoners, mostly of them innocent. So the new wave of Russian leadership decided to make it softer than during the Stalin, and they released a lot of people. Some of them were Jewish, and some of them, being themselves believer communists, coming to this high school of Gulag, changed their minds and became Zionists. And then being released, still young people of age 30, 40, they come back with a decision to help Am Yisrael in Russia, to stop assimilation, to try to re-educate the young Jews. And it's how it happens that by miracle, I got exposed to these kind of people.
So what was some of the original inspirations that you had? What was starting to move you and touch you?
As a matter of fact, friends in a high school would bring some Jewish literature, printed illegal in Soviet Russia, that had, Jewish topics. And it was Jewish history and analyzing the real situation of the Jews in Soviet Union. And I felt it's okay with me. I love this kind of information. It's like I looked for it. It was like inside of me. I did understand it, but sometimes you need to formulate it. And I got it imprinted, that it's it, that the Soviet power is wrong, and they try to assimilate us, and to be a Jew is a privilege, is a benefit, and I would like to be a real Jew, to come back to my roots, to learn, and I enjoyed whatever I could learn from Jewish history and Jewish ethics or whatever. I enjoyed it. I felt it's mine, not the Soviet propaganda. It's really mine. So I would tell that my beginning was from love, not hating somebody. Just I found something that pleased me very much. I enjoyed it. It's how it started.
What did you enjoy?
Enjoy to be Jewish, to learn more of my nation. For I am a Jew, it fits me. Like you are giving somebody food that it is not eatable for him. And finally he's getting something that is eatable and tasty. It's what's happened to me. I got food of a Jewish philosophy, Jewish history that I liked very much. I ate it, and finally I finished to be a believer Jew.
Do you remember any ideas or experiences that helped you crystallize your desire to really be a part of this, to go forward?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's a long story to tell. And it was a step-by-step development, so I cannot tell all the steps of me becoming a believer Jew. But normally I mentioned the experience of rebuilding of a site of Holocaust. Next to Riga, they had a terrible place where some tens of thousands of Jews were massacred during in the beginning of the war in 1941. And the Soviets, the authorities, wouldn't take care of the place. It was in the forest. Nobody was aware until, again, the new generation of prisoners of Zion released from Gulag of Stalin discovered the place, and they decided they will invite Jewish youth to rebuild and reconstruct the site in this way to meet us, like young people, boys and girls, and in this way to prevent assimilation, like to use the massacre and the terrible site, not only to rebuild it, but just to, to build a group. And it happened, They came there, it was in the beginning of the 60s. I was the first that came there. The place is nowadays very known. It's called Rumbula. That Erev Hanukkah, 1941, some 25,000 Jews there were massacred, and the Germans would bring more and more until it come maybe up to 100,000 people. The whole area in the forest, whatever, was full with it. So certainly, coming there and digging and building with other Jewish boys, it worked in two directions: to reconstruct and to make friends. So just there on this site, I decided to start running underground Jewish organization of students. I was at the time a student in university, to prevent assimilation, to fight for freedom of a Jew to immigrate from Soviet Union. So it's a direct outcome. They have like a Yom HaShoah in Israel, and normally the leftists and the liberals say, why it happened, Nobody can explain, and believe that it's wrong to explain why it happened. It was like a judgment of the God. But what I can say, from my experience, and the outcome, I am a child of the people that were killed. From there on the graves, I understood the meaning and the value of being a Jew, and not only being a Jew, but struggling and fighting to prevent another massacre. For me, it meant to come back to the roots and go back to my homeland.
So what did you actually start to do at that point? You were a young person. Were you just learning? Were you engaged in activism? What practically did you begin doing?
Altogether, everything. To begin with, it was not me alone. As I mentioned, I met friends on this site, and we had a group. So for the beginning, we start studying and learning ourselves, for we were ignorant altogether. And the moment we got some information, and I studied by myself Hebrew, for I didn't know Yiddish. And Yiddish in Latvia is very rich with Hebrew, like up to 30%. So I picked up Hebrew, and I started Hebrew classes with boys and girls that I would meet there in this specific place or in synagogue. So we started running groups, and then later on we connected with other groups. It turned out that not only in Riga, but as well in Moscow, Leningrad, in Kiev, Kharkov, and different places, there are groups like ours. So finally in 1968, we established a national educational system coordinating our deeds. For as an educator, you need printed materials. And by the way, you need budgets, money. So it's a task, and then we needed some technique to multiply, to print whatever we had. And it went on. So it was very successful. I believe that time we embraced thousands and thousands of Jews in the underground groups that studied. And I myself, at age 20, that time, was appointed to be an editor of underground Jewish bulletin. Would involve not only a regular editor to collect materials or print, physically, technically, you have to find a way to print it and to send to different places. So it was a real involvement in real depths of the struggle for survival of Jewish nation.
Was that the main way you communicated, was through the underground paper?
Yeah, sure. For people would come from different places to get their copies, and it's how we established this coordination committee, where we decided, and again, according the clever advice of a former prisoner of Zion that served in a Stalin Gulag, never establish a real organization, just coordinate, which means really organization, but never call it organization. It's like a coordination. We meet, we discuss our problem, make some decisions. If somebody has, say, textbooks in Hebrew, we have to move it to another place. If somebody has like printing machines, that time the major technique was to print in Riga. So we shall print for somebody and move it to Moscow.
And how did you avoid getting caught by the authorities at that time?
Somehow, I believe that our organization was already infiltrated by KGB agents. For being an open education system, you're not going to check everybody is he a KGB agent or is not. You're simply glad to everybody that is coming to learn. So they didn't know why they wouldn't arrest us. I believe, remember, it was a different time. It was not already Stalin time. The Soviets start understanding that they depend on the West. They cannot simply persecute people for studying Hebrew. It's why they collected information. And later on, I saw like a report on a session of Politburo. Politburo at the time was the leading group of the Communist Party in Kremlin. And there was like a report of the head of KGB telling, friends, we have a problem. We have information that the Jewish youth is becoming nationalistic. And we can't explain how it happened. Everybody got our Russian education. Why it happened that they have groups and multiply, like they felt bad about that. They looked for a way to, to disperse us, to eliminate our Jewish education. But we already, as I told, they were exposed to Western public opinion, and they hesitated.
So what did you start doing in your 20s? Because eventually you did get caught, as I understand. So what led to that happening?
It was like a different project of our organization. My feeling and that of my friends was that simply in having the small classes, we cannot save nobody. For again, that time we had around 3 million of Jews there. In our movement and like educational system, we can get some 1,000, 2,000. It was not enough. So it was obvious to me and some of my friends that the only way to save our people is to open the gates of Soviet Russia for freedom of the immigration. And as far as it was impossible, it was altogether illegal. We decided to hijack a Russian airplane to dramatize our situation, that people in the free world would understand that not like Elie Wiesel, Alav Shalom would say that we are silent Jewry. We were a spoken Jewry. Young people, not being afraid of anything. So we decided to declare we are alive, Am Yisrael Chai, and hoping that you people in the West will help us. So together we shall break through the Iron Curtain, which happened.
Did you expect to actually be able to steal a plane, or did you anticipate this would be more of a publicity move to call attention to your cause?
Okay, we had like a beautiful scheme to hijack a small airplane, having only Jewish passengers on the board. As I have to mention that flights inside Soviet Russia were legal, Russia is twice as big as America, so normally there are flights inside, and you can, even that time, you can buy tickets and go. So our organization, members of our group, bought all the tickets on a small airplane with only 12 passengers, and we had our Jewish pilot, Mr. Dimshitz, Major Dimshitz, that was formerly a pilot in Russian Air Forces, so we could do it easily. And then Again, the main reason for me, at least, to take part in this plot was to publicize our fight and to dramatize it, to show to everybody that people are going to die for freedom. And we believe that it will help us. So finally, also we were arrested on the spot in the airport. Certainly, as I mentioned, we were heavily infiltrated by the secret services. Not this small group, but we were part of a bigger educational movement. And somehow, doesn't matter how, they got to know about our preparation. And they felt that it's like serving their purposes. For they figured that arresting us, teacher in Hebrew and Jewish tradition, they can declare that all groups of this kind are in fact terrorist groups that try terrorists. And it happened, we were arrested and tens and tens of people were arrested and questioned. And it was a major destruction of our educational movement. So the Soviets felt that they did it. They crushed our movement, but only for a while. In the end, after the interrogation finished like a half a year ago, there were 36 dossier folio of our interrogations, and the last page of the volume 66 was written. It was like a declaration of KGB. They would declare that under this specific investigation, they questioned some 1,000 people that were connected to this Jewish movement, and they mentioned these 1,000 people are connected with much more thousands of people. It's not in our power to question everybody. So when I saw as we say in Yiddish, the unterste Schure, the bottom line, I understood we won it. They understood that it was not a small group of terrorists, but a broad national movement that they can do anything. Their time, it was already the beginning of the 80s, they couldn't suppress us. They had to admit that really there is a trend, there is thousands and thousands of Jews that are willing to leave Soviet Russia, and also they passed very harsh verdicts to us. In the same time, they decided to open the gates. So the first year I served in a prison, some 15,000 Jews got permission to leave, which was unprecedented. For previously, you can Google it. Some maybe hundreds of Jews would be permitted to leave Soviet Russia. And now it was 15,000. Next year, it was 30,000. A year later, 35,000. So the immigration started. So being there in a Russian concentration camp and getting a penalty of 12 years of compulsory labor in this concentration camp, I told to myself and the God that if me being in prison can bring freedom to other Jews, I am ready to stay as much as needed. For it's the biggest mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuim. So sometimes you have to pay with money and sometimes with your life. But a life of one man has incomparable to the freedom of hundreds and thousands of Jews. So it was really a privilege to serve my nation in this way.
How did you feel during the time that you were in captivity? What was your state of mind?
To begin with, I understood that it is our victory. Like if a soldier tried to attack the enemy and was killed, but his troop went forward, it's a victory, right? And then we had Jewish friends in every camp. So the moment we come there, after the trial, we established our underground Jewish organization to educate Jews. I became again a teacher in Hebrew, in Jewish tradition, and I took care to have a Shabbos and Jewish holidays. So I was busy all the time, If you don't feel that it is a mistake, and if you understand that every Jew in every place has a position, as we say in Hebrew, "B'makom she'ein anashim tishtadel liyot ish." So I try to be myself, a human being, a Jew in every place, and a fighter. So it was like a privilege, a benefit to be in a camp. For then, I understood that being there and keeping mitzvahs in a Gulag, I set an example to other Jews, to refuseniks, what's the real approach to our problems. It's how later on in the 70s, the Tshuva movement started in Moscow and Leningrad. People start not only being refuseniks. Refuseniks mean you applied for a permission to live, you're being refused, so you have to survive and so on. No, just the opposite. They became Balei Tshuva. They start building underground groups to learn Torah and later on Gemara, etc. So it was a real revival, like out from destruction. It's what the KGB hoped, that arresting us, they will distract the national movement. It turned to be our survival. As always, as we know, with the Jewish nation. And from one hand, you have a churban of destruction of the temple. From another hand, you have a revival, you have a Rashi and Tosfos and whatever, and it's flourishing. Is the special nature of Am Yisrael. You can never ruin us.
Did you have any contact in the West? Did you know at all what was going on with the Free Soviet Jewry movement and things like that were taking place at the time?
See, we got some kind of information, for we had some meetings with our relatives, not me specifically, but other fellow prisoner Jewish got kind of information. But to tell you something interesting, after me being in the prison for 7 years, it was already 1977, Nathan Sharansky was sentenced. And he was moved after the trial to my prison, so-called my prison. That was the, and then we could communicate through the pipes, through the toilet. Like the basin of toilet is the beginning of somebody's, canalization system, so you can talk. And I called him, he come up to the telephone and asked him, Nathan, that time he was Anatoly Tolik, what's happening in the world? Do people support our struggle? And then he was really knowledgeable for 1977, 1978. It was really a peak of all the movements, of all the pressure, of the release. So he told me the whole story. I understood after 7 years that what we expected happened, and it works.
How long did you have to stay in prison? The entire 12 years?
I stayed 11 years in prison.
It's incredible because it seems like it didn't break you even through 11 years of imprisonment.
Why should they break me, I am a winner. I and my friends won the battle. So, why should they break us? So to be in prison, it's like maybe worse condition, food or whatever. But we are soldiers. We are soldiers of Am Yisrael, so it doesn't matter for us. When you succeed and we achieve the breakthrough that Iron Curtain got broken and thousands and thousands of Jews start living, became coming back to the roots. Why should they break? They got broken. As you know, later on, they broke down. They got broken, not us.
How did you observe mitzvot in prison?
It was an effort to keep mitzvahs, not really to observe, but for some things were impossible, like we had not film. Then we couldn't really eat kosher food. There was, nobody would, but we, like Chofetz Chaim, in his famous letter to Russian soldiers, to try to avoid eating treif. And it is what we tried. Just to mention, it was like a political prison for, it was called the prison for most dangerous political prisoners. I was very dangerous to them. And there were others. Yeah, I am dangerous, really, The moment you are have an open brain, you are dangerous. Anyway, and there were other people, not specifically Jews, of our approach, people that fought against the Soviet regime, and specifically for the independence of their national republics, like Ukrainian, Lithuanian, etc. We got a lot of their support. It was very important. With their help and support, it was easier to keep mitzvahs. For example, on Shabbos, we had to report that we produced whatever we needed. Every day they check if you produce 100%. If you don't produce it, you are being punished. So we had an Ukrainian boy, a nationalist, that was in charge of reporting to the authorities, and they would report that Mendelevich produced 100% on Shabbos, which I wouldn't do it. So in a lot of small stories. Come to listen to my lectures, I will tell you much more. In our interview, I could bring you more broad concept what it was about.
So how did you finally get out?
I don't know. It's them, the Soviets. But I was told a funny story, a good story, by a former refusenik, Yitzhak Kogan. He is known as a tzaddik from Leningrad. Yitzhak Kogan was a tzaddik from Leningrad, being himself an engineer in nuclear submarines. All of a sudden, he became a refusenik and believer, and then he discovered that he has roots in Chabad, and he became a Chabadnik, one of the leaders of a new generation of people in Chabad. And then it happened that in the end of 11 years of imprisonment, the authorities of the prison found that I have some illegal sforim, like Chumash and Siddur and some other, and they confiscated. So it's a long story to tell, but I decided I will fight them, and I declared a prolonged hunger strike, trying to pass the knowledge of my hunger strike for good reason, protesting of taking our sacred books to UN human rights mission. So it took time, and finally, after 2 months of the hunger strike, the authorities of the prison got it, and they start negotiating, to give me some books back if I stop the hunger strike. It happened. It turned out later, and it is what I heard from Yitzhak Kogan, that exactly that time, there was a shaliach of Chabad. They came to see Yitzhak Kogan, and he was astonished with whatever they are doing. And the shaliach told, I'll come back to the Rebbe and tell, whatever you are doing, he will bless you. And then Yitzhak told, never bless me. Say the Rebbe, he has to help Yosef Mendelevich out of the prison. And it happened. In a month, I was out of the prison. So specifically, I believe it was Edgar Brofman, at the time the president of World Jewish Congress, that I believe that a Rebbe contacted and asked to make a major effort of my release, and it worked. Edgar Brofman discussed my release with, that time there was an ambassador of Soviet Union in United States, Dobrynin. Some people would ask me how much bottles of Seagram Brofman gave. I don't know, but it happened, All of a sudden, like a month after I finished my hunger strike, I was taken immediately from Siberia by an airplane to Moscow, and then they sent me away. Told me, you don't deserve anymore to be considered a Soviet citizen. It took 11 years for them to understand that I don't fit the criteria of a Soviet citizen.
You went straight to Israel then?
It was not my decision. Directly from the prison, I was escorted in a big black car, escorted by Russian police to the airport, and they threw me away. That's how in the morning I was a prisoner, and in the evening I was already in Israel. So I wouldn't say that then I became a free man. As you understand, being in prison, I was free myself anyway.
I'm curious, what came of your siblings who are around your age? What happened with them?
To begin with, I had the 2 sisters. And again, after the authorities, immediately after our release, understood how broad our movement was, they decided to send everybody away. And it's how my sisters were the first one, once they got permission to leave and come to Israel in 1971. My mother passed away, as I mentioned, when my father was arrested and I was a child. And then they insisted my father would leave as well. But my father told, I will never leave until you release Yosef from the prison. He stayed there for more time, becoming himself a leader of a Jewish movement in Latvia. They hated him, but he can do anything, for he got a good education being an underground communist movement, so he did know how to do that. Finally, he got a stroke and passed away some 3 years before I was released.
So it sounds like when you got to Israel, you already had family, sister waiting for you there.
Yeah, true. But mostly my aim was to study in yeshiva. So the next day, I come to Israel. In fact, I stayed for the beginning with one of my sisters, Rivka Jewry, in Alon Shvut. And then I studied with Rav Lichtenstein. And then I moved to Merkaz Arav Yeshiva. And then I studied for a rabbinical degree in artificial kollel in Bais Vagan. So I moved from one place to another, accomplished my studies, and immediately after my release, I got married.
Did you marry another prisoner of Zion? Who did you find to marry?
It happened that at that time, they had at Merkaz Arav Yeshiva a girls' organization, so-called Shomer Achia Anochi. I am my brother keeper, like contrary to what Cain told, that I am not a keeper. And mostly it was run by Avital Sharansky to help Anatoly out from the prison. And there were girls helping her in whatever she did. So when I was released, she was aware that for a time I spent time with Anatoly in the prison, and I can tell more about his conditions. So she sent one of the girls that worked there to interview me and to prepare me to the press conference. So imagine what happened.
You married the girl.
Yeah. Also, she was not Russian. He was from Paris, from France. But, you know, we have a common language, Hebrew. Later, she admitted that I had a better command in Hebrew than her. You know, it is what I advise Russian boys, if you would like to marry a Jewish girl in Israel, learn Hebrew, you know. For otherwise, how can you date? I could date right away, you know. I have the language, and I had a certain, whatever I did know, I remembered a lot of stories. I will tell another funny story. When stepping down from the airplanes that arrived to Israel, that time I was a celebrity. A lot of correspondents in Ben Gurion airport come to the airport to interview me. And one of them asked me, what a vision of Israel do you have? And imagine it was in the Porsche of the week of Yitro. I told, Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. Unbelievable, you know, a prisoner released from a Gulag prison have in his heart the vision of Am Yisrael and can bring it in Hebrew exactly how it's being told. So imagine the journalist closed the camera and told another fanatic arrived.
What have you done in Israel in the last number of years? What have you dedicated yourself to since coming out from behind the Iron Curtain and settling in the Holy Land?
To begin with, Torah education. I teach in Machon Meir Yeshiva, and I have hundreds and hundreds of students for the time. And then with Anatoly Sharansky, we established an organization to help newcomers to get adjusted to Israeli life for many years. And then in Torah College, there was a Torah College branch in Jerusalem, and Professor Lander, Alav Shalom, permitted to start a special Russian department in Torah College for absorption. So we absorbed people with university degrees, and I was the head of the project. So I was very busy for a long time. And then, I have to admit, the life is not you are all the time you are riding on a white horse. Sometimes you are not riding, It happens, So I wouldn't tell that my life is 100% success. It's all the time the problems with educating the children and getting parnose and whatever, It's the life, But never would I forget that my main aim is to save my nation and to bring closer the time of Mashiach. I'm not a Mashiachist, but I believe it depends on us. He can come now.
Are you still in touch with Sharansky and any of the other major players from that time? What's your current relationship with them and with him specifically?
You see, we are somehow friendly. For example, at that time he was the chairman of a Jewish agency. I could call his secretary and we could arrange a meeting in a Jewish agency discussing small problems, not big ones. And the same with Edelstein. For Sharansky would admit that he is like an offspring of our activities, like my child, for we educated the second generation of activists what to do. Also, we are the same age. And then Edelstein would say, I'm like a grandchild for, I got education from Sharansky. I started when Sharansky was arrested. So 3 generations, also more or less the same age. But, it's easier to call a Jewish agency. Now Sharansky has his office, even easier to get there. You can get that easy to Edelstein. He is a very high person. Also, he is a grandchild, but it happened, that the grandchild are better than the Zaydes.
Does it frustrate you that some of the leaders of the movement don't share your religious convictions? I know some of them are traditional, some of them are more observant, less observant, more passionate, less passionate about the Jewish religious angle for Russian Jews. Does that ever bother you?
Sharansky is Shomer Shabbos, and the same with Edelstein. But to tell generally, to share my outlooks means to be more energetic, to make a major effort to at least to educate the Russian Jewry, the followers of Lieberman. It really frustrates me to do that. We had never got the tools to do that, and I openly talked and discussed it with people I wouldn't mention their name, no help. And being there in the bottom, I was in the bottom. I mean, I can get a budget of $1,000, but I can't establish a yeshiva. I can't start, and certainly not a broader educational movement as we had there in Soviet Russia. It really frustrates me. And there is, for example, a famous teacher, Eliyahu Esses, that was really the father of the generation of Gemara learning in Moscow. When he arrived to Israel, and if I being the prime minister or somebody, I will tell, okay, you run now the whole issue of education of Russian Jews. Nothing that happened. He's sitting in his place. He has like a site, website, or whatever. He had could do much more. And not only him, there's a famous Rabbi Zev Meshkov and a lot of people, that hardly struggle for their survival, financially and educationally.
It's ironic and sad that some of these people were able to do more in communist Russia than in the Jewish state.
100%. They could do, and they still can do in Israel, but they don't belong to the parties. And you don't belong, and it doesn't matter that you are a celebrity or you are a celebrity, you can do anything. It frustrates.
So in starting to close, what would you say your dream is today for Russian Jewry? What's the prognosis? What can still be done? What would you like to see happen with that large and critical population?
To begin with, Russian Jews that arrived to Israel, thousands and thousands of them became believers. Shomer Shabbos, we have Rabboim, young Rabboim that studied in Israel and speak Russian language. So I can tell that nothing happened. And then, nowadays, the Russian Jewry became a part of Israeli Jewry. You can't consider it as something separate. For if a Jew from Russia settles in Bnei Brak, you have almost 99% that he will become a believer. Or if he comes to a certain settlement in Judea, certainly he will become a believer. But if he comes to Tel Aviv or Herzliya, so it what happens. So again, I underline, certainly much more could be done and should be done for Soviet Jewry, for they are brainwashed differently from many Jews worldwide. But being in Israel, they are part of Israel culture. It's the problem of Israelis in general. The general approach of Israelis to Emunah, to Torah, will influence finally, in the long run as well, the Russian Jews.
So is there anything that can be done?
What I can do is, I go around and I teach, and I have my Facebook, and, whatever. I don't know. I have a plan. I have a scheme what to do, but it is is not helpful, The moment you became, if I could become a part of Likud movement, or maybe Gimel or whatever, maybe I could have more power. But it's a story of, I believe in Korea, there was a dragon, was dangerous, and nobody can withstand him. And finally, there was a man that withstand the dragon. Why? He became himself a dragon.
That is profound. Well, as I know, you do speak all over. I mentioned at the beginning, I heard you speak live. And I have your book. Tell us a little bit about how that book came about and what your goal has been with it.
My book is called Unbreakable Spirit in English. It's translation, as a matter of fact, from Hebrew and from Russian. It happened not that far away, like in the beginning of 2012, a certain person from Chicago, Pamela Cohen, that used to be a national president of Union Council for Soviet Jewry, called me up and told me, Yosef, why wouldn't you publish your book in English? So I told, it's very expensive. I can do it. So she took up the challenge, collected some $30,000 and published it in Hebrew. And he told me, there are two reasons why I decided to publish the book. It is not me, she published, and the friends in Chicago decided to publish. Two reasons. For the beginning, is you true to your book. Somebody can tell about his past, dreaming and doing, and then coming to the free world, altogether different, So it doesn't mean you are the same. You dream to become a leader, became a rabbi, to influence other people. You continue to do that. It's why we can publish your book. And then she told me, see, we American Jews tried to save Russian Jewry. Now I hope with your book, we shall help to save American Jewry.
Well, given the work that I do, I can assure you that we certainly need it. Yosef Mendelevich, Unbroken Spirit is the book. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank God. Toda Rabba LaHashem.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/JewsYouShouldKnow. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.